we learned here is how to do what are called the product rule, the quotient rule, and the chain. All right. So essentially, at this point, we've learned how to calculate the derivative of a polynomial, right, or 3x squared plus 2x, and we've learned how to do the derivative of sine and cosine, and then similarly integrals of those same functions. All right. But what if we have a function that's a little bit more complicated? All right. What if we have a function that is maybe two smaller functions being multiplied by one another, right? What if we've got f of x times g of x? Or what if we've got f of x divided by g of x? Or what if we've got a composite function where we're taking f of g of x, right? So it turns out there are these different rules here. There's the product rule, which I'll show you here in a minute. There's the quotient rule, which actually has this little shortcut that you can use to memorize it. So this is sort of part of our quotient rule. All right. And then there's the chain rule for when you've got composite functions. All right. So let's probably just dive in and do an example. All right. So the product rule says if you've got a function that is f of x times g of x, and you want to find the derivative of this new function, then what you do is you multiply the first function by the derivative of the second function. And then you add that to the derivative of the first function plus times the second function. Okay. So for example, in this example here, I've got h of x is equal to 4x squared plus 3x times the cosine of x. And so if I want to find the derivative of that, h prime of x is going to be my first function times the derivative of the second function. So derivative of cosine is negative sine plus, now I want the derivative of this first function, right? I want the derivative of this first function. So let's see, 4 times 2 is 8 times x just to the first power plus 3 times, now my second function, times the cosine of x. All right, and there you go. That's the derivative. That's how you do it. All right, and then obviously you could, find the value of the derivative at x equals 2. I suppose you could try to find a max or a min by setting this max equal to 0, which I guess I probably wouldn't recommend, but theoretically it's a thing you could do. All right, so that is what's called the product rule. All right, now the quotient rule, same idea, but here we're dividing. So this time, instead of having f of x times g of x, now we've got f of x divided by g of x. All right, and so the way that you find your derivative is you take the bottom function times the derivative of the top function minus, and then you switch it. So now it's the top function times the derivative of the bottom function, and then the whole thing gets divided by the bottom function squared. All right. I can never, ever, ever remember this. I literally have to look it up every single time I do it. But the math teachers here have come up with this clever mnemonic device to remember it. And there's a little song that goes along with it, and they'll teach you that. But so what we're going to do is we're going to call the top of the top function high, and we're going to call the bottom function low. And then D means derivative. So here's our little trick. The derivative with respect to x of high over low is low times the derivative of high, low d high, minus high d low. Low d high minus high d low all over low low. All right, and again, there's a song to it. So it's low d high, it's the bottom times the derivative of the top, minus high d low, top derivative of the bottom. Okay, all over low squared. Okay, so, and at that point, then it's just kind of plug and chug, right? So let's do this one. So here we've got, here's our h of x. You can see it's, this thing over this thing. So this is my high and this is my low. All right. So I want low d high. So h prime of x is low d high. So low is cosine of x. D high, that's the derivative of the top. So that's 8x plus 3 minus, and now you just switch it. So instead of low d high, it's high d low. So that's 4x squared plus 3x. That's my high. D low. Derivative of cosine is negative sine. All over low, which is cosine squared x. Okay, so there you go. That's it. That's the quotient rule. Okay. All right, and then finally, we have the chain rule. So this one explains how to take the derivative of a composite function. Okay, so for example, we know how to take the derivative of cosine of x, but what's the cosine? What's the derivative of cosine of this mess, right? So what this is, so you can see we've got like here f of x would be cosine of x, and g of x is 4x squared plus 3x, and we want cosine of 4x squared plus 3x. So we're finding the derivative of f of g of x. And so essentially what you do is you take the derivative of this, just like you learned how to do, and then you multiply it by the derivative of the inside thing. Okay, so let's try it. So h prime of x is, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the derivative of this mess. So what's the derivative of cosine? The derivative of cosine is negative sine. So this is negative sine of the same thing here, 4x squared plus 3x. Okay, so at this point, it's the same as if we had just, cosine. Derivative of cosine is negative sine. But then you take the derivative of the thing that's in your function, right? So now I'm going to multiply this by the derivative of 4x squared plus 3x, which is 8x plus 3. All right, so there we go. There's our derivative. Okay. Now, if it helps, you can, break it up into chunks like I started to do, where you go, all right, well, let's see. I guess I'm backtracking here. So f of x is cosine x. G of x is 4x squared plus 3x. F prime of x is negative sine x. G prime of x is 8x plus 3. And so now what I want is h of x is f of g of x. So h prime of x is f prime of g of x times g prime of x, which is, well, let's see. F prime of x is negative sine x. It's negative sine, but I don't want f prime of x. I want f prime of g of x. Oh, and g of x is this, 4x squared plus 3x. So that's this, and now I just want to multiply by g prime of x, which is 8x plus 3. And then you're done. Okay, and you'll notice both of my answers are the same. All right, so that's the chain rule. All right, let's do another chain rule one. All right, suppose I give you something like this. So this time I switched which one was f of x and which one's g of x, right? So this one, it sort of looks like I've got a polynomial, but instead of having 4x squared plus 3x, I've got 4 cosine squared plus 3 cosine, right? So it looks like this is f of x, and then g of x is cosine x, right? And what I've got here is I've got f of g of x, right? So I'm going to apply the power rule to my polynomial. Well, here, I guess let's finish this up. So f prime of x is 8x plus 3. G prime of x is negative sine x. So I want f prime, oops, sorry. I want f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So f prime, that's this, 8x plus 3. But I don't want x, I want g of x. So I want 8 cosine x plus 3, right? Then all of that times g prime of x, which is negative sine x. That works. All right. Alternatively, you can think of it this way. I see that I've got 4 cosine squared x. So I'm going to apply the power rule. So 2 times 4 is 8 times the cosine of x. But now I got to do the chain rule and take the derivative of cosine of x, which is negative sine x. And then plus 3 times the derivative of cosine x is negative sine x. Cool. And if you factor out the negative sine x, you get the same thing that we had before. All right, there you go. That's the chain rule. This one will probably take some practice. And honestly, it doesn't come up until later in the year anyway, so not that big of a deal. All right, that is it.